Sometimes the hardest thing for a person to adjust to is not chaos, it's peace. When life has been shaped by survival and pressure becomes familiar, like scanning, anticipating, and bracing for impact, those patterns don't disappear overnight. The Bible calls those strongholds. Strongholds are patterns that form through survival, interpretations that fire before we even think about them. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 10:5 that we take every thought captive to obey Christ. And that's one thought at a time, one interpretation at a time, one reaction at a time. And that is how strongholds fall. And when that begins to happen, something else gets exposed. And for a long time, survival trained you to live under that pressure. And over time, that pressure became familiar. And when the pressure lifts, peace can feel unstable. Jesus speaks directly to that in Matthew 11:28. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I had to confront this in my own life. For years, I lived inside pressure and intensity. And when that pressure lifted, I didn't know how to live without it. I didn't know how to be alone. I didn't know how to have peace. I didn't know how to live without pressure driving everything. I could not even trust what I was feeling. And I had to learn to trust being okay. And I had to learn that it is okay to not feel okay. So what did I do? I went back to what was familiar, back to the same patterns, back to the same relationships, back to the same way of living that had shaped me before everything fell apart. Pressure was familiar, quiet and peace were not. Once I began to recognize that in myself, I started noticing the same pattern in other places. For example, veterans returning from war and struggle to settle. Men and women leaving prison and discover that freedom can feel disorienting after years of structure and tension. People in crisis get stabilized and then get back to their lives, and they find themselves in the same cycles again. I've watched the same thing happen in churches. Someone comes to Christ, something real happens, and then when the emotional intensity fades away, they assume something has gone wrong. And for years, the brain and body rehearsed the same pathways, just scanning for danger, anticipating the next problem, bracing for impact. And those reactions were learned. And the brain strengthens whatever pathways you keep using. The more a pattern fires, the easier it becomes for the brain to fire it again. That's how those survival reactions become automatic. Chaos was predictable. Stability feels foreign. The old pathways are still there. So what do you do when peace feels unstable? You confront the thought with what God has said in His Word. If the mind tells you that you're on your own, the Bible answers it. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding." If the mind tells you the future will collapse, the Bible answers it. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose." If fear begins to take control, the Bible answers that also. 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." And this is where grace matters. Grace is not permission to stay in the old life. Paul addresses that directly, Romans 6:1-2. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? He says, by no means. Grace is the gift of God that makes a different life possible. It is not just forgiveness. It is the way into new life. And now we begin to live that life. When we replace the lie with what God has said in His Word, our responses begin to change. Those responses become behaviors. And over time, those behaviors begin to produce steadiness, right emotion, and peace. That is how the mind is renewed. And that is how a person comes under leadership of God and walks in step with the Holy Spirit. Peace stops feeling unstable, rest becomes livable ground. I'm Brandon, and this is your Momentum Moment.